Close your eyes for a moment, my friends. Take a slow breath. Imagine a quiet morning kitchen. The world outside is still soft and gray, and a thin line of sunlight touches the table. In front of you sits a warm cup, dark, steaming, alive with aroma. You lift the cup slowly, and the smell rises toward your face, rich, bitter, deep, almost like warm earth after rain. This smell wakes something inside the mind. Some people say the day truly begins only after the first sip. Across the planet, at this exact moment, millions of people are doing the same small ritual. A cup, a pause, a first sip, and suddenly the mind begins to move. Ideas wake up. Plans begin to form. The heavy fog of sleep slowly disappears. But have you ever wondered how this drink became the quiet engine of the modern world? Because coffee was not always welcome. There was a time when rulers feared it. Religious leaders argued about it, and some cities even tried to ban it completely. Imagine that for a moment. A drink so powerful that governments tried to stop it. Why would they fear a simple cup of dark liquid? What secret power could hide inside a tiny brown bean? The answer begins far from our modern cities, far from cafes and espresso machines, far from the sound of morning traffic and glowing laptop screens. It begins in a land of high mountains and red soil, a land where the air is cool in the morning, and the hills roll gently under the African sun, a place where goats wander across green slopes and ancient trees grow quietly among the rocks. And one day, in that quiet landscape, something very strange happened. A young goat herder noticed his animals behaving in a way he had never seen before. The goats were jumping, running, almost dancing in the fading light of evening. They refused to sleep. They seemed full of energy, as if the night itself could not slow them down. The herder watched carefully. He followed the goats across the hillside, and there he saw something small, something easy to ignore, a bush covered with bright red berries. The goats were eating them, and after eating them, they became wild with energy. The young herder bent down and picked one berry from the branch. It looked simple, just a small fruit with smooth red skin. But inside that fruit were two small seeds, hard, green, silent. Seeds that would eventually travel across deserts, across oceans, across empires. Seeds that would wake the minds of kings, writers, soldiers, workers, and dreamers. But on that evening, the herder could not know any of this. He only knew that something unusual was happening. And sometimes, my friends, history begins exactly like this. Not with a battle, not with a king, but with a quiet moment of curiosity, a person noticing something strange, a question forming in the mind, and a simple decision to look closer. Tonight we follow that small moment, because from those red berries on a hillside in Ethiopia, a journey began. A journey that would slowly change mornings all across the world. So pull your chair a little closer to the fire. The night is calm, the story is long, and the first step begins more than 1,000 years ago. Let's go back in time. Let us continue our journey, my friends. The hills of Ethiopia were quiet that evening. The air was cool, and the sun was slowly sinking behind the distant mountains. A soft golden light touched the grass while long shadows stretched across the rocky ground. The young goat herder stood among his animals and watched them carefully. They were still restless, still jumping, still full of strange energy. He had never seen his goats behave like this before. Usually, as evening arrived, the animals became calm and slow. They searched for a comfortable place to sleep and rested quietly through the night. But not today. Today the goats seemed almost joyful. They ran from one bush to another and continued eating the bright red berries growing on the branches. The herder picked one berry and rolled it between his fingers. It felt smooth, light, almost ordinary. But curiosity is a powerful force, and curiosity has started many important stories in human history. Slowly, he placed the berry in his mouth. The fruit tasted sweet at first, but the seeds inside were bitter and firm. He chewed them carefully, not sure what to expect. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The hills remained quiet. The evening wind moved gently through the grass. But then something began to change. His body felt lighter. His mind felt clear. The heavy tiredness of the long day slowly disappeared, and a quiet alertness replaced it. It was not loud or dramatic. It was subtle, like a small light turning on somewhere inside the mind. The young herder did not understand what was happening, but he knew one thing. These berries were special. The next day, he carried a small handful of the red fruit to a nearby monastery. The monastery stood on a hill of pale stone, surrounded by simple trees and dry earth. Inside its walls lived monks who spent long hours in prayer, study, and quiet reflection. Their lives were disciplined. Their nights were long. Often they struggled to stay awake during midnight prayers. The young herder approached the gate and showed the berries to the monks. At first, the monks were cautious. They had never seen these fruits before, and strange plants were sometimes dangerous. One of the older monks examined the berries slowly. He turned them in his hand. He smelled them. He looked thoughtful. Some stories say the monks believed the berries might be the work of the devil. Others say they simply did not trust an unfamiliar fruit. Whatever the truth may be, one monk made a sudden decision. He threw the berries into a fire. The flames quickly surrounded the small fruits, and the red skins began to burn away. But then something unexpected happened. A rich aroma filled the air. Warm, dark, deep. It drifted to the quiet stone room and reached every corner. The monks looked at each other with surprise. The smell was beautiful. They quickly pulled the roasted beans from the fire and crushed them with simple tools. The roasted seeds broke apart into dark fragments. Then they mixed the crushed beans with hot water. The liquid turned deep brown. Steam rose slowly from the cup. One monk lifted the cup and tasted the drink. The flavor was strong, bitter, but strangely comforting. Soon the other monks tried it as well. That night, during their long hours of prayer, something remarkable happened. They did not fall asleep. Their minds remained awake and focused. The quiet drink helped them stay alert through the darkness. It became a small companion during the long nights of devotion, and without realizing it, the monks had created something new, a drink that could sharpen the mind, a drink that could help humans resist fatigue, a drink that would one day travel across continents. But at that moment, it was simply a small secret in a mountain monastery. Outside, the wind moved across the Ethiopian hills. The goats continued wandering across the slopes, and the world had no idea that a quiet revolution had just begun. Because those roasted seeds would soon begin a long journey, a journey carried by traders, by travelers, by curious minds who could not forget the strange power of the little beans. And the next stop on that journey would be across the Red Sea, in a land of deserts, ports, and ancient trade routes, a place where the dark drink would find its first true home. But that chapter is just beginning. The journey of coffee did not stop in the Ethiopian mountains. Slowly, quietly, the beans crossed the Red Sea. Traders carried them in small leather bags while ships moved between African and Arabian ports. The wind pushed their wooden boats across dark blue water toward the Arabian Peninsula. There, in the rugged lands of Yemen, coffee began a new chapter. Yemen was a place of mountains, deserts, and ancient cities built from sun-baked stone. Caravans moved slowly through narrow valleys while merchants carried spices, silk, incense, and many other treasures along the old trade routes. Among those goods now traveled something new: small green beans. At first, people in Yemen used the fruit in a simple way. They crushed the berries and mixed them with animal fat to create small energy balls that travelers could carry during long journeys. But soon, another method appeared. The beans were roasted, then ground, then mixed with hot water. The drink was dark and strong. It warmed the body and sharpened the mind, and the people of Yemen quickly understood its power. In the port city of Mocha, merchants began selling the beans to travelers and traders from distant lands. Ships arrived from Africa, Persia, India, and Egypt, and slowly the reputation of this strange drink began to spread. But coffee was not just a drink. It was becoming something else. In many Yemeni towns, small coffee houses began to appear. Inside these places, the air was warm and alive with conversation. Clay lamps flickered softly against stone walls while men sat on low cushions and drank small cups of thick black coffee. They talked about poetry, they talked about trade, they talked about religion and philosophy. Some nights they simply listened to music, while the smell of roasted beans filled the room. These coffee houses became places where ideas could travel freely. And that was both beautiful and dangerous, because whenever people gather to talk, something powerful begins to happen. Ideas grow, questions appear, opinions form. And rulers have always watched such places with careful eyes. At first, coffee seemed harmless. Just a drink. Just a place for conversation. But slowly, the gatherings became larger. More people arrived. More discussions filled the night. Scholars debated religious ideas. Merchants argued about politics and trade. Travelers shared news from distant lands. In these rooms, information moved faster than ever before. And not everyone felt comfortable with that. Some religious leaders began to worry. They wondered if the drink itself might be sinful. After all, it created excitement in the mind and energy in the body. Some scholars asked whether this strange drink might disturb the calm spirit required for prayer. Others feared the coffee houses themselves. Too many people gathering, too many voices speaking freely, too many opinions moving through the air. And where there are many opinions, disagreement soon follows. The tension slowly grew. Whispers began spreading to the cities of the Arabian world. Some people praised coffee, others questioned it. And then, in the early 16th century, the debate reached a breaking point. In the holy city of Mecca, one powerful governor made a decision that would shock coffee lovers everywhere. He believed coffee houses encourage rebellion. He believed the drink made people too energetic, too curious, too willing to question authority. So, he acted. Coffee was declared illegal. Coffee houses were closed. The drink itself was banned. Imagine the silence that followed. The familiar rooms where people once gathered were suddenly empty. The lamps were dark. The cups were gone. For a moment, it seemed that the story of coffee might end there. But human habits are stronger than laws. People had already tasted the strange energy of the dark drink. They loved the warmth. They loved the conversation. They loved the feeling of their minds becoming bright and awake. And once people discover something that awakens the mind, it is very difficult to make them forget it. So quietly, secretly, coffee returned. People drank it in private homes. They brewed it behind closed doors. Merchants continued trading the beans across distant markets. The ban slowly weakened. Then it disappeared. Coffee had survived its first great challenge. But this was only the beginning, because the drink was about to travel even farther. Soon it would reach the great cities of the Ottoman Empire, cities where coffee houses would grow larger, louder, and more powerful than anyone could imagine. And once again, rulers would begin to worry. By the 16th century, coffee had already crossed deserts and mountains. But now it entered one of the most powerful empires of its time, the Ottoman Empire. Its capital, Istanbul, was a city of breathtaking beauty. Tall domes rose above the skyline. Minarets reached toward the sky. Ships crowded the busy harbor while merchants filled the markets with spices, silk, metal, and stories from distant lands. And somewhere in those busy streets, a new kind of place appeared. The coffee house. The first coffee houses of Istanbul were simple but welcoming. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans and warm smoke from small charcoal fires. Brass lamps glowed softly in the evening. Low wooden tables stood beside thick carpets, and men gathered there to drink small cups of strong black coffee. The cups were tiny, but the conversations were enormous. Poets recited verses while musicians played quiet melodies on traditional instruments. Travelers described distant lands. Merchants discussed business deals. Scholars debated philosophy and religion. Hours passed easily in those rooms. Sometimes an entire evening could disappear inside a single long conversation, and slowly the coffee house became something special, a meeting place, a thinking place. A place where ideas moved freely from one mind to another. But freedom of thought has always made rulers nervous, because ideas are powerful. They move faster than armies. They cross borders without passports. And once an idea enters a human mind, it is very difficult to remove it. Some Ottoman leaders began to watch the coffee houses with suspicion. Too many people were gathering. Too many opinions were being shared, and sometimes those opinions included criticism of the government itself. In the quiet corners of smoky rooms, people discussed politics. They joked about leaders. They questioned decisions made by powerful men. At first, these conversations seemed small, but rumors spread quickly. Soon the rulers of the empire began to believe that coffee houses were dangerous places where rebellion might grow. During the reign of Sultan Murad IV in the 17th century, the fear reached its highest point. Murad IV was known as a strict and powerful ruler. He believed discipline and control were necessary to keep the empire strong, and in his eyes, coffee houses threatened that control. So he made a dramatic decision. Coffee houses were banned. Again, the drink itself was forbidden. Soldiers were ordered to patrol the streets and close any place that served coffee. Some stories even say the punishment for drinking coffee could be severe. The streets of Istanbul grew quieter. Many coffee houses closed their doors. But something curious happened. The love of coffee did not disappear. People simply adapted. In private homes, families continued brewing the dark drink in small metal pots called sazpi. Friends gathered quietly behind closed doors. Coffee moved from public spaces into hidden rooms. And slowly, as time passed, the bans began to weaken. Because even rulers cannot easily defeat a habit that has captured the human heart. Coffee had become more than a drink. It had become part of daily life, part of conversation, part of human connection. And the empire itself could not function without the energy of its people. Eventually, the coffee houses reopened. The lamps were lit again, the cups returned to the tables, and the voices of poets, merchants, and travelers once again filled the night air. Coffee had survived another attempt to silence it. But the story was not finished, because beyond the borders of the Ottoman Empire, another world was waiting. A world that had never tasted coffee before. A world of kings, scientists, writers, and explorers. Europe. And soon the small dark beans would arrive there. At first with suspicion, then with curiosity, and finally with unstoppable enthusiasm. By the early 1600s, the dark drink had already traveled far across the Middle East. Caravans had carried sacks of beans through deserts, and ships had moved them between busy ports. But a new journey was about to begin, across the Mediterranean Sea, toward Europe. At first, Europeans did not know what to think about coffee. The drink came from lands that many Europeans considered mysterious and unfamiliar. It arrived through merchants from the Ottoman world, and its deep black color made some people uneasy. In Venice, one of the busiest trading cities in Europe, the first sacks of coffee beans appeared in the markets. Venice was a city of water and stone. Long canals cut through the city like quiet rivers, while merchants shouted in crowded marketplaces. Ships arrived every day carrying silk, spices, and rare goods from distant lands. Among those goods now sat something unusual. Small green beans that smelled faintly sweet and earthy. Some curious merchants roasted the beans and brewed the dark drink. At first, the reaction was mixed. Some people loved it immediately, others were suspicious. The flavor was strong, bitter, different from the sweet wines and beers that Europeans usually drank. And because coffee came from Muslim regions, some religious leaders questioned whether Christians should drink it at all. One Italian priest famously called coffee the bitter invention of Satan. He believed the drink might tempt people away from proper traditions. The debate soon reached an important figure, Pope Clement VIII. He was asked to decide whether coffee should be banned. Imagine the scene. A small cup of dark liquid placed carefully before one of the most powerful religious leaders in Europe. The Pope examined the drink. He smelled it. Then he tasted it. The flavor was rich, warm, complex. Instead of rejecting it, the Pope reportedly smiled. According to legend, he said that such a delicious drink would be a shame to leave only to the non-Christian world. With that simple approval, coffee entered European society, and once it arrived, it spread quickly. In Venice, the first European coffee houses opened during the 17th century. Soon they appeared in other cities: London, Paris, Vienna, Amsterdam. Inside these early coffee houses, something fascinating began to happen. The atmosphere was alive with curiosity. People from many backgrounds sat together at long wooden tables while the smell of roasted beans drifted through the air. Writers discussed literature. Scientists debated new discoveries. Merchants exchanged business ideas. Travelers described strange lands they had visited, and all of them shared the same dark drink. Coffee did something unusual. It encouraged thinking. Unlike alcohol, which often slowed the mind, coffee seemed to sharpen it. People felt alert, focused, ready to talk and listen for hours. In London, coffee houses became so important that people gave them a special nickname. They called them penny universities. For the price of a single penny, a person could buy a cup of coffee and sit among some of the most interesting minds in the city. Students listened to scholars, writers exchanged ideas, business deals were made at small wooden tables, some newspapers even began in coffee houses. Important conversations about science, politics, and trade filled the rooms from morning until late at night. The coffee house had become a new kind of public space. Not a palace, not a church, not a government building, but a simple place where ordinary people could gather and exchange ideas. And ideas, as we know, have the power to change the world. In these lively rooms, the modern age slowly began to take shape. New scientific discoveries were discussed. Explorers shared stories of distant oceans. Philosophers questioned old traditions. The energy of coffee fueled long conversations that stretched deep into the night. But this growing popularity created a new problem. Europeans loved coffee. They wanted more of it, much more. And almost all of the world's coffee still came from a single region, Yemen. The Yemeni traders protected their coffee plants carefully. They roasted or boiled the beans before export so that no one else could plant them. They wanted to keep the secret of coffee cultivation to themselves. But history rarely allows secrets to remain hidden forever. Somewhere, someone would eventually find a way to carry living coffee plants beyond Yemen. And once that happened, coffee would begin its greatest journey, a journey across tropical islands, vast colonies, and new continents. A journey that would transform the drink into one of the most important global crops in human history. But that journey would not be simple, because behind the comforting smell of coffee, another darker chapter was waiting to unfold. By the late 17th century, coffee had become deeply loved in Europe. The cafes were full. Merchants drank coffee before opening their shops. Writers filled notebooks while sitting beside warm cups. Scientists argued about new discoveries under the soft glow of candlelight. The demand for coffee was growing quickly, but there was a problem. Almost all the coffee in the world still came from Yemen, and the rulers there protected their secret carefully. Before selling the beans to foreign merchants, they often roasted or boiled them. This made the beans unable to grow. No one outside Yemen could plant their own coffee trees. For many years, this system worked. But history has a quiet habit of breaking every monopoly. Somewhere along the long trade routes, living coffee seeds escaped. One story tells of a Muslim pilgrim who secretly carried fertile beans from Yemen to India in the late 1600s. Another story describes Dutch traders who managed to obtain living coffee plants and bring them to their colonies. However it happened, the secret was finally out. Coffee could now grow in new lands. The Dutch were among the first to act. They planted coffee trees on the island of Java in Indonesia. The warm climate was perfect. The trees grew well. Soon, coffee from Java began traveling to European markets, and people loved it. The word Java even became another name for coffee, but the story did not stop there. European empires quickly realized something important. Coffee could become a powerful economic crop, so they began moving the plants across the tropical world. The French carried coffee trees to islands in the Caribbean. Portuguese farmers planted them in Brazil. Spanish colonies experimented with coffee in Central and South America. Wherever the climate was warm and the soil was rich, coffee trees began to grow. Across tropical hillsides, new plantations appeared. Rows of green coffee trees stretched across the land. During harvest season, workers moved through the fields picking the bright red cherries one by one. Inside each cherry were the familiar seeds, the beans that would soon be roasted and brewed in cities far away. Ships carried enormous sacks of coffee across the oceans, from Brazil to Europe, from the Caribbean to North America, from Asia to distant ports around the world. Coffee had become a global trade. But this expansion also carried a heavy human cost. Many plantations relied on enslaved labor. Men and women were forced to work long hours under the hot sun, picking cherries, carrying heavy baskets, and processing the beans. The drink that gave energy to millions of people was often produced through hardship and suffering. History is rarely simple. Behind many everyday comforts, there are difficult stories hidden in the past. Coffee was no exception. Yet the drink continued spreading, and as the years passed, new cultures began shaping their own unique coffee traditions. In Vienna, elegant cafes became centers of music, art, and philosophy. In Paris, writers and revolutionaries gathered in crowded coffee houses. In the growing cities of the Americas, coffee became the drink of workers, builders, and dreamers. By the early 19th century, coffee was no longer a rare luxury. It had become part of daily life. The small bean from the Ethiopian hills had traveled across oceans and empires, and the world was only beginning to feel its influence. Because the next chapter would bring something even greater. Coffee would not only travel across the world, it would become the daily companion of millions of ordinary people: farmers, factory workers, soldiers, students, inventors, people facing long days and difficult challenges, and through all those moments, a small cup of dark coffee would sit quietly beside them. By the 19th century, coffee had already traveled farther than anyone in Ethiopia could have imagined. The small bean from a quiet hillside had crossed deserts, oceans, and empires. Now, it stood firmly inside the daily rhythm of human life. In many parts of the world, the day began with coffee. Cities woke slowly. Street vendors prepared small cups over glowing coals. Workers stopped briefly before long shifts while the smell of roasted beans filled the morning air. Coffee had become a quiet companion of effort. In Brazil, enormous coffee plantations stretched across rolling hills under the tropical sun. The country's warm climate proved perfect for coffee trees, and production grew quickly. Soon, Brazil became the largest coffee producer in the world. Ships left Brazilian ports carrying mountains of coffee beans packed inside thick burlap sacks. Those ships crossed the Atlantic Ocean toward Europe and North America. Every arrival filled warehouses with the dark treasure. Meanwhile, in Europe, coffee culture continued evolving. In Vienna, cafes became elegant salons where musicians, philosophers, and artists gathered beneath chandeliers. The rooms were quiet but alive with thought. People read newspapers. They discussed politics. They played chess while sipping small cups of strong coffee. Across the continent, in Paris, cafes spilled onto busy streets. Writers sat at small round tables with notebooks open beside steaming cups. Some of the greatest ideas in literature and philosophy began in those noisy cafes. Coffee had become the drink of thinking people. But coffee was not only for philosophers. It was also the drink of workers. In the growing cities of the United States, factories began opening before sunrise. Railroads expanded across enormous distances, and workers needed energy to face long hours of labor. Coffee provided that energy. Strong, hot, reliable, a simple drink that helped people push through fatigue. During the American Civil War in the 1860s, coffee became especially important for soldiers. Both Union and Confederate troops carried coffee beans in their supplies. When night fell and the camps grew quiet, soldiers roasted the beans over small fires. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the dark fields while metal cups warmed tired hands. For many soldiers, coffee was more than a drink. It was comfort, a small reminder of home during difficult times. Even in the harsh conditions of war, people found strength in that familiar bitter taste. Back in the cities, coffee houses continued growing in number. New machines appeared that could roast beans faster and more evenly. Later, new brewing methods created different styles of coffee. Some drinks were strong and intense, others were smooth and gentle. Each culture began shaping coffee in its own way. In Italy, espresso machines would later produce small, powerful cups of coffee topped with a thin golden foam. In Turkey, finely ground coffee simmered slowly in small metal pots, creating a thick and aromatic drink. In Scandinavia, people drank large cups of lighter coffee during long winter days. Everywhere coffee traveled, it adapted. It became part of local life, part of conversation, part of daily ritual. By the end of the 19th century, coffee had become one of the most traded goods on earth. Millions of farmers depended on it. Millions of workers drank it every day. The dark bean had quietly connected continents: Africa, Asia, Europe, the Americas, all linked by the same simple ritual: a cup, a pause, a moment of warmth. But even with all its global success, coffee still carried something deeper, something more human, because behind every cup stood a long chain of lives. Farmers waking before sunrise, workers harvesting red cherries in distant fields, roasters turning green beans into fragrant brown treasure, Baristas carefully pouring hot waters through fresh grounds. Each cup held a story of effort, a story of connection, and perhaps that is why coffee never disappeared, because it was never just a drink. It was a shared experience, a quiet bridge between people across the world. And now, my friends, we arrive at the final chapter, the moment where we return to the present, where the long journey of coffee meets the small cup waiting quietly on your table. Now, my friends, let us return to the present. The long journey is almost finished. Open your eyes again and imagine the small cup sitting quietly before you. Steam rises slowly into the morning air. The aroma is warm, familiar, comforting. It is such a simple moment, yet inside that small cup lives a story that stretches across centuries. A story that began on green hills in Ethiopia, where a curious goat herder noticed his animals dancing in the twilight. A story that continued inside quiet monasteries, where monks searched for strength during long nights of prayer. A story carried across deserts by merchants and sailors who followed the ancient trade routes of the world. And later, a story whispered inside coffee houses where poets, scientists, and dreamers gathered to exchange ideas. Coffee became the silent witness to human thought. It stood beside philosophers who questioned old beliefs. It warmed the hands of writers searching for the right words. It gave energy to workers who built cities, railroads, and industries. Even soldiers in distant fields found comfort in its bitter warmth. And through all those centuries, one quiet truth remained. Coffee helped people stay awake, not only awake in body, but awake in mind. Awake to questions. Awake to possibilities. Sometimes the greatest changes in history do not come from loud moments. They do not arrive with trumpets or thunder. Sometimes they begin in quiet places, in a small room filled with conversation, in a simple cup held between tired hands. Coffee became a symbol of that quiet strength, a symbol of resilience. Because life has always asked humans to endure long days and uncertain nights. Farmers wait before sunrise, students study late into the evening, inventors spend years searching for answers, writers struggle with empty pages. And through all these moments, people often reach for the same small ritual. A warm cup, the slow breath, a moment to gather strength and begin again. Perhaps that is the secret power of coffee. Not only the energy it gives the body, but the pause it gives the mind. The moment between exhaustion and effort, between doubt and determination. And so, every morning when the aroma of coffee fills the air somewhere in the world, it carries with it a quiet reminder. Human history is not only written by kings and battles, it is also written in small daily rituals, in shared conversations, in the quiet resilience of ordinary people continuing their journey. The little bean that once grew unnoticed on a hillside now connects billions of lives across the planet. From farmers harvesting cherries in tropical mountains to baristas preparing cups in busy city cafes, to you, sitting here in this quiet moment, all connected by the same simple drink. So the next time you lift a cup of coffee, pause for just a moment. Notice the warmth. Notice the aroma. And remember the long path that brought that small cup to your hands. A path of curiosity, of struggle, of human resilience. Thank you for sitting with me by the fire tonight. Until next time, my friends, sleep well.